Welcome to Linear 2. We're still on Theme 1, Learning Outcome 1.3. For today's slideshow and the video clip, we'll be looking at the role that language plays within the different cultures. We're on page 94 in your textbook, Cultural Variations in Language. What is more important, being a good speaker or a good listener? Is it preferable to be effective at communicating verbally or non-verbally? Is it better to be direct to the point, or is it better to take some time getting to the point? Therefore, they're just saying here that different cultural groups have different answers to these questions. There's no right or wrong. And it's not also saying that because you're part of this culture, that this is how you follow those rules of the culture. Within a culture, there'll be variations of individual preferences, but the following is going to look at the different cultural variations of how language is used in terms of the attitude towards speaking, writing, and silence. So in this particular section, we're looking at how language is used and how it's different in attitudes towards the speech, silence, and as well as writing in those cultures. Okay, let's get started. In some culture groups, they say US and Europe speech communities, which is more on the individualistic side of the orientation, speaking is highly valued because we get to speak to our friends and our families in an interpersonal communication context, which goes back to our Communication Science 1A work, which is to communicate in a dyad or a small group of 3 to 5 people, or for public speaking. These are all viewed as very positive, to be quick on one's feet and to articulate really well in these contexts. So here they're just making use of being a good political, business, or religious leader. He has the ability to communicate oneself very well. And in these cultural groups as well, we have to look at that because we're so good at speaking, listening becomes a bit more secondary, a less important mode of communication there. So that's just like how sometimes it goes because we're so good at speaking and articulating, and well, it's kind of more valued. The more you speak, the better it is. But then listening to someone can become a little bit more of a secondary mode of communication. As well as in this particular cultural group, they say that silence is sometimes viewed very negatively. If you think about it, if someone isn't talking to you, you'd see that as very hostile. Or if someone's giving you the silent treatment, you might think that you're being rejected. Therefore, in terms of this orientation, they say that silence is viewed very negatively. This is not necessarily true for all groups because it does depend on the culture, but in terms of this one, it does. People may feel bad if they're not connecting with people, and there might be too many pauses or quiet moments in the conversation. And it does speak to you as well as how do you view silence? Do you feel like it's a negative thing, or do you feel like it's okay that sometimes you have a person there that doesn't want to talk to you right now? And so on. But in terms of this culture group, they see it as, we can't really understand each other, or we're not friends anymore, we're not connecting with them, and so on. In contrast, in different culture groups, there's an emphasis on the silence and harmony, and speaking is more secondary. Because they say within this culture, they distrust speech, particularly public speaking. And within our textbook example, we have the Motswana culture, which is it's better to keep quiet as it helps to not offend people and prevents one from exposing his or her ignorance. In general, children should be seen and not heard. If children want to speak, it should be with great respect towards elders, usually by most flattering and polite words during the conversation. And it depends as well in the context if someone should be silent or talkative. Within a same gender social group, a talkative attitude is very appropriate, whereas in traditional African cultures, the children of women should be kept quiet and listen more than become part of the conversation, which is just to respect the elders. They also say near the Amish culture is referred to as the quiet in the land, where they prefer silence, which becomes more of their highly valued mode of communication, especially in public settings. In East Asians, many East Asians may not only distrust speech, but they see that silence is a useful skill and not viewed negatively as per the other cultural group. It shows the ability to read another mind's intuitively and even more powerful way of controlling the conversation than to just keep speaking and so on. You can read through the examples of the Kim 2002 quote there and other examples they've listed there as well. So therefore, I find this very interesting. That does depend on the culture. It's not to say that because you are part of this culture, you obey this, but you might actually recognize this quite a lot as well. That in certain cultures, to be quiet means that you're reflecting and you're taking in the conversation, that you can provide, a bit more clear advice than to keep speaking and then listen to parts of the conversation. Or you might view silence quite as a primary mode, as per the Amish culture, where listening also is part of it, but silence is primary to this. As we go on into the textbook on page 95, they give a lot of examples to say that because of this, we need to understand that there is going to be misunderstandings in intercultural communication, and that silence does mean different things to different people and doesn't necessarily mean that, this person doesn't like you, for example. Certain cultures do prefer silence. They see silence as a skill, and you can just also read through all the examples they've put in there. Silence should also be viewed as a conversational strategy. Silence is a way of saying no in some cultural groups, knowing when to talk. And it's important to note what is the meaning of silence in different sense. And then, of course, we have to make note of the relationship between writing and speaking. So we've been speaking a lot about, the speaking mode and the listening mode, but we haven't been talking about writing in these cultural groups. In Western cultures, writing is quite an emphasis over speaking, because if I give you something in a written contract, that is way better than me saying we had a verbal contract, for example. When in other cultures, it is much better to have the oral communication than the written communication. Publicly saying that you made a commitment is highly valued than signing a paper. So it does depend on the culture. Of course, there's also moments in oral communication where it's very important, like saying I do when you're getting married, as opposed to just signing the marriage license. And the examples that kind of go on and on like that. So we can note here those differences and respect the differences as well. In the next part of our section, we go into the variations in communication style. Sorry, I forgot to change the slide there. But this is just noting that within writing and speaking, it does differ across the cultures there. In the next part of our work, we're looking at variations in communication style, which will be in our next clip.